In today's video, we're talking about how you as a student can learn content for the very first time at a fast pace. People only talk about how to revise for exams, and I've made so many good videos about how to study effectively using active recall and spaced repetition. Make sure to check those out. But I realized that after talking to my brother, who just started the IB, I realized that to the person who's just starting a new A-levels or university course, just jumping straight into making questions and making flashcards immediately from the content that they see isn't really the easiest way to start and to understand what they're learning. It's actually quite overwhelming to learn in these ways from the start. And what happens is people go either one of two routes. Either they go like, nah, I don't want to do this. Active recall, testing yourself really isn't for me. I'm just going to stick to making notes, making summaries from the textbooks, and then revising that a week or two before the exams. And yes, this does work for some people, but it just takes 3 times longer than it needs to. And then the second group of people are people who fully embrace the active recall methods. They've learned to test themselves, they make flashcards, but instead of understanding the information first, what they do is they heavily rely on memorizing those flashcards and the questions that they make. They make thousands and thousands of Anki flashcards and questions and then focus on rote learning them instead. This is a problem because yes, even though you may be testing yourself, what you don't realize is that if you don't understand something, if you don't have a good mental model of it in your head, you're going to be wasting so much extra time trying to memorize those specific details when in reality, gaining the holistic understanding would be so much more beneficial. Instead of going either of these routes, for the person that's just starting to learn something for the first time, you just need to do 2 simple things. 1, understanding the topic, and 2, retaining the concepts of that topic in your head. But since we've already talked about retaining topics and active recall, what we're going to be focusing on today is the easiest and best strategies to understand something for the first time when you're learning it. How are we going to gain a broad understanding of the topic when we're looking at it in the beginning? What do we do to learn new concepts effectively? Now, understanding information isn't actually that complicated, and there's no magical method to it. You're gonna have to go through new content by either reading the textbook, listening to the lecture, or watching a video, or something of that nature. But instead of just reading and going through everything passively, what you need to be doing is continuously testing yourself and asking yourself questions while you learn the content for the first time. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this video or change in the way you learn things, it's this. It's so essential to quiz yourself and test your understanding while you learn something because it accelerates your understanding of it so much. The biggest misconception that people have when learning something new is that we need to fully study the topic before we can actually test ourselves and do practice questions. So people reread the paragraph again and again until they fully get it and then they test themselves. When in reality, that's not what you should be doing. Learning and testing go hand in hand. Active recall is a fundamental part of the learning process when you're going through something for the first time. As in, it's all well and good to look at a concept, read it a few times and go like, yeah, you know what, I pretty much got that, it's quite easy. But the reality is that you reading it doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove that anything actually went in your head. When you're learning something, when you read a small section from your textbook for the first time, instead of just doing the normal thing and moving on, what you do is you quiz yourself. You ask yourself some basic questions. Do the classic cover testing and ask yourself, what have I learned in this topic so far? What are the key things that I need to learn from these paragraphs? Like, would I be really able to explain what cholecystitis is? Probably not. Okay. Let's go through it. I know that cholecystitis is an inflammation in the gallbladder. I know it's to do with the gallstones getting stuck in the opening of the organ and not letting bile out. But beyond that, I don't think there's much that I know. There's so much of the pathology that I don't understand. Okay, let's go back. What do I not know? What specifically will help me for the exam? Actually go through this information that you're learning in your own head. Explain it to yourself or write it on a rough piece of paper. Either way, test yourself. If you're doing the Krebs cycle in biology, go ask yourself what is the role of acetyl coenzyme A. If you're learning about perfect competition, go through the 4 conditions for it in your head. For chemistry, quickly do practice equations for the oxidation of alkanes after going through the theory in the textbook. You get the gist. While you do the reading, you're engaging with the whole process of active recall within the time that you're learning itself. When you test yourself on something that you've just learned, you force yourself to go back and connect the dots of knowledge even more. It increases your retention of the information and almost guarantees that you will have a good understanding of the topic by the end of it. Now, the honest truth is that this process of quizzing yourself in between your learning doesn't really feel natural, if that makes sense. You have to stop every few subsections, rehearse what you've learned, and then do some questions on it or ask yourself questions on it. And it just slows down the process of learning a lot. And for example, especially if I had a test coming up in the next week, it actually made me quite nervous to slow down and not just read through everything really quickly. But I knew that the way I did things before, i.e. rereading the content or making summary notes, just didn't get me the top grades, and it didn't work efficiently at all. So as difficult as it was, I knew that testing myself was the way forward. There was heaps of scientific evidence behind this. I knew that whenever I did the whole cover testing, whenever I asked myself these questions when I was revising, I understood the content afterwards a lot better, and I also retained it a lot longer. So I had to try it. I had to do it continuously, and at the end of it worked out. After incorporating active recall within my learning, instead of treating it as a separate thing, it slowly just becomes a part of your normal process. And you end up picking up things and understanding things a lot better than you used to. Once you get to the point where you've gone through the topic like once, now you can start to make questions, start to make flashcards for your future active recall sessions. In university and now in medical school, I usually just make these questions the first time that I'm going through the topic to save myself some time. But if you're just starting off with all these effective study techniques, then do it how you want, as long as you're testing yourself and quizzing yourself while you learn about the topic for the first time. By the way, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but before you start to actually learn something, you need to be scoping the topic out, understanding all the main subtopics in that big topic, and then figuring out what's high yield, what's not high yield, and focusing on the high yield content for the majority of your studying time. One very underrated tip that I have is to find the best resources that you can to study, understand, and then revise a topic for that subject. I feel like it's so worth it doing this because what most people do is that they just grab the big fat textbook for that subject that the school just hands to them, open it up on page 1 and start reading that. But if you find a condensed high yield revision guide, if you find a good YouTube channel and then supplement those two resources with the big fat textbook, you'd be so much better off. It's such a big help to know what the high yield resources are before you start studying the subject. So go ask your teachers, ask older students, go on Reddit and try and find these niche resources that will really give you the best advantage when you're trying to understand something for the first time. I did exactly that for IB biology. My primary source for revision was this revision guide by Andrew Allott that condensed the entire course into 100 pages. I'd use Alex Lee's YouTube channel for analogies and explanations, and then I'd supplement that with the big fat course companion Oxford textbook. The same with chemistry. Richard Thornley was amazing on YouTube. I'd use this perfect condensed Cambridge revision guide that was so helpful and has so many worked out examples, and then I'd supplement explanations from the fat Pearson textbook to help my understanding. I'll just put out the best resources you can use for IB subjects. These might help with A-level content as well. Check them out and review them in your own time. I highly recommend these. The second tip I have is so important. If you have good resources online, if you have past papers and question banks, like you do in the IB, in GCSEs, and A-levels, then you don't really need to make notes at all. You don't need to make questions even, because you have perfect notes in the form of these condensed revision guides, and you have perfect questions in the form of old past papers. Literally, if you can find a good, high quality, condensed revision guide for your subject, then you immediately have a perfect set of pre-made notes. You use that as your primary resource of learning and understanding a topic for the first time, and you supplement it with videos and the big fat textbook that the school gives you. And for questions, you have thousands of them in past papers and in question banks, so you don't really need to make too many of them. Yes, make a few extra ones for your own revision, but rely on the past paper and the question bank a lot more. In uni and medical school, it's a bit different. You have to create these resources for yourself to fuel your own learning. But in school, just use the stuff that's online, use the stuff that's been given to you, use the past papers, and find good revision guides to actually get through content efficiently for the first time. After going through the content for the first time, you'll probably end up forgetting a fair amount of it in a few days. So it's crucial that you come back to revise it, to understand it, to enforce active recall, and force yourself to remember what you learned a week ago or 10 days ago. To build up that understanding again, to retain that information, you need to test yourself and then fill the gaps of knowledge. It'll be different for different subjects, and if you want to learn more about the best ways to retain knowledge using step-by-step active recall fueled methods, then check these videos out. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, subscribe for more content in the future, and as always, I'll see you next week. Bye bye.